Explorer, you've arrived at the threshold of an epic journey where self-love meets fitness. Gather your courage as we seek to challenge the limits of our bodies, become mentally resilient, and learn to cherish ourselves for the beautiful individuals we are. Along the way, we'll be joined by incredible mentors in the pole and fitness community who will share their wealth of knowledge to help you blossom. This is the Pole Adventures podcast, and your adventure starts now. Welcome, explorers, to another episode of Pole Adventures. I'm your host, Paris, an eternally struggling pole dancer, here to bring you the wisdom of Dani Winks. Dani is a professional contortionist with over 11 years of experience teaching pole dancers, aerialists, circus artists, and more. And she is a master at distilling these practices on her Bendy blog. So, of course, today we'll be exploring flexibility, but specifically what we can do as beginners or if we're coming back for a long break. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So I'd love for you to tell us a bit about, your pole or, contortionist adventure. Like, what was your why for jumping into it all?
Sure. I always like when people ask, like, how did you get into contortion? Because usually people assume it's something you've done since you were like 7 and you've trained in the circus. Yeah. And that was not my path into it. I got into it when I was 22 by way of Groupon, which is a discount site here in the US. For those who aren't familiar with it. And so I got a Groupon for an aerial silks class. I was like, wow, this looks so cool. I didn't know you could do that. I'm going to try it. I tried it, loved it. So I signed up for a bunch of classes. And I was like, let's see what other classes the studio has. And they had contortion. I'm like, well, yoga's pretty neat. I bet I'd like contortion. And tried it, loved it, became obsessed. Rest is history. So I've been doing that for better part of 11 or 12 years now. I actually now do it full time, both performing and teaching. I got to quit my day job last year, which is very exciting. So now I get to say I am a professional contortionist. And pole dance was kind of similar. It wasn't Groupon, but it was a couple years ago. I was in Boston with one of my friends, and I was like, we should take a pole dance class. It looks so cool. Tried it, loved it, then started doing pole, and got a lot more serious about it over COVID because, we're all stuck in our houses, and I was like, I need something like to keep me sane here. I need like a good project. And I got a home pole, I got an X pole. And I was like, now I'll just like do all my contortion on the pole. And that was really fun. That's really where it started. Like,
yeah, I wish I could come into that sort of background. Yeah. So I just really loved it. Yeah. And, for all our fellow nervous beginners, do you have an embarrassing moment to share from your contortionist or your pole?
That's a good question. Trying to think of something about pole. Most of my pole ones are pretty much just like, kind of getting stuck in shapes or the I don't want to call it the slide of shame because there's nothing to be ashamed about slowly sliding down the pole. Oftentimes that's a very acceptable exit to poses. But yes, I can think of many instances where I'm like trying to get into a trick and I like think I got it. And then I just, nope. And you kind of just hold on to the pole and slowly slide to the floor. My spirit animal is definitely a sloth. I love sloths. So I like to just think that that's channeling my inner sloth when I'm dancing.
If a contortionist gets stuck in shapes, what are the rest of us going to do? When you're approaching flexibility for the very first time or, returning to it, although that's been a long time for you, are there any key things to keep in mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's good because it applies to both the beginners or maybe people who've been polling for a little while and flexibility seems kind of important. I should probably start actually working on it, as well as people who maybe were bendy. Yeah, maybe they were bendy at one point in their life. Like they did gymnastics, they did dance, and then realized, wow, I can't do anything I used to be able to do. Both of those people are kind of in the same boat. Kind of general advice would be to start slow. As exciting as it is to pick up a new thing and say, I'm going to stretch every day for 60 minutes. I'm going to get my splits in 3 months. It's going to be great. Just like any other type of active hobby, like pole, your body needs to adjust to a training volume. So starting small, just doing 1 class a week or 1 or 2 stretching sessions on your own off of YouTube videos is a really great way to start. The good news is you don't have to stretch every single day, nor do I actually recommend that. Rest days are a huge part of effective training that a lot of beginners don't realize, because usually people think more is better. I'm going to be serious. I'm going to be dedicated. And you can make lots and lots of progress by starting really small. The other piece of advice I would recommend is working with a coach. Of course, I am biased because I am a coach, but I am sure if you are taking pole classes either online or in a local studio, you will have access to lots of incredibly talented people who are very knowledgeable about anatomy and the theory behind stretching. So one thing that's really helpful, because there is lots of information on the internet, some of it's not great, is working with a person that you trust to help kind of guide you to the best stretches for your body, so you don't have to pick through the hundreds of thousands of YouTube videos, splits routines, and try to figure out, is this an actual helpful routine, or is this just garbage of someone basically showing off in a follow-along stretching routine?
Yeah, so would you recommend, stretching, like, practicing all this stretching stuff before you come to a pole class? Or can you just kind of get on?
That's a good question. And there's a couple of different theories behind why you might want to do it differently. This is a question I get a lot from students, especially students who come to me for private lessons and we're trying to build together a stretching routine. So when it comes to flexibility training, you could be using your flexibility training to make flexibility gains. So if your gain is to get more flexible, like you want to get your splits, you want to be able to push up into a bridge, you want to do contortion, most likely your flexibility training sessions are going to be a dedicated thing during the week. This is your day that you do flexibility. You do strength training for that particular skill to get stronger and more flexible. And you don't want that to be a part of your pole training. Perhaps it could come after your pole class while you're still warmed up, which is a great way to do it. But I wouldn't recommend doing it before your pole class, because then you're going to be super pooped by the time it is to do all of your fun stuff on the pole. Your body's going to be shot because you've been working out really hard for already an hour. The other way to take it is if you are using your flexibility training because in your pole session, you need to be bendier to work on a particular skill. Maybe you're working on something crazy like you're in a leg hang and you're trying to grab your foot and pull it towards your head. That takes a whole lot of back and shoulder flexibility that very few people can do without stretching beforehand. So I have some students who like to do their flexibility training more in a lighter capacity as part of their conditioning and prep for pole work if they're working on specific skills that require that flexibility. But the trade-off is then that they're going to be a little bit more tired during their pole workout, and they're probably not going to go to their like super maximum extra bendiness as when they were only training flexibility, but they're going to use it for a practical purpose.
Is there any specific parts of the body that you would recommend training first, or just everything?
That's a good question, and it's going to depend a little bit on your goals and if there's anything in pole particularly you're trying to do. Usually, for lots of pole things, at least in my opinion, a lot of the fun moves are splitty, and if you can get your hips and your legs a little bit more flexible, that gives you a lot more options of fun things to do on the pole, as well as things you can do as part of floor work. But there's also a lot of moves that include back bends that involve twisting with our spine, arching through our spine, reaching our arms either behind us or over our head, which are all different ranges of motion. So generally, it's probably going to be hips, back, and shoulders, which is most of the muscle groups in the body from a practical perspective. So it kind of depends how folks are motivated. I have some students who really like to do everything at once. They want to do all of the things. So they work on their back and their shoulder flexibility. They work on their split flexibility. That could be taking like a full body flexibility class at your pole studio or something online. Or it might be what a lot of students do is having one day where they're working on their back and their shoulders, and then they have a separate day where they work on their legs and their splits. There's also a lot of students who are a little overwhelmed by doing everything at once, which is valid because there's a lot that you could choose to do. And sometimes having one specific goal, like I just really want to get my front splits, and working on that 1 to 3 days a week. So that way you're only working on the muscles you need for front splits, which would be something like the stretching the hamstrings in your front leg and the hip flexors in the back leg, and strengthening all of the muscles around that area to be able to make that stretch a bit more comfortable. So totally depends on how you're motivated, whether you like to do everything at once, or whether you work a little bit better with a specific goal.
Yeah, I just remember the first time that we were showing the Jade split, and I was very disappointed that it was a V or
it was like a JV.
Yeah, that's the way. But then the people who had a splitty background or was just like straight up, yay, I'm flat, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's not in the cards for me.
I was very spoiled when I started my pole journey because I had been doing contortion for the better part of like 5 to 7 years. So the flexibility was all there. So once I had the strength, I could just do moves that I'm pretty sure many of the girls in the class have, been struggling their butts off for months, but I had all of this foundational flexibility that I've been training separately for years and years and years and years. But that made it very fun for me, is that I could do all of these fun shapes.
Yeah, did you struggle with the strength side at all?
With the what? Sorry, I didn't quite hear you. Oh, the strength side.
Did you?
Yes, very much. That was certainly a bit of a humbling piece, which I suspect everyone has kind of that going into pole. Like, sure, we know it's hard. We know it's one of those things that's probably harder than it looks. But I figured I'm pretty damn in shape. I've done aerials before. I do a ton of strength training for torsion. I lift weights. I'm like a buff little gal. Pole kicks my ass. Pole is so exhausting, and I'm always so sore after pole. But that said, I can now do 3 pull-ups now, which is not a thing I ever thought in my wildest dreams I would be able to do. So I have gotten so much stronger by training pole. But yes, especially at the beginning, even just the basics of trying to climb the pole took a while. It takes a lot of strength, and it's not strength that many people come in having from the get-go.
Yeah, that's so awesome to hear from a professional who I would assume contortion stuff requires strength too.
Yeah, and one thing that I learned a little bit over time, especially as I started working with more pole students and teaching contortion in the pole studio, is pole itself is a lot of using our pulling muscles. You're using your arms to hoist us up the pole, pull us into inverts, pull us into a climb, and things like that. And so much of contortion is actually using our pushing muscles. So in terms of the strength that we use, they're very complementary, which is why I really encourage folks who do pole to work on things like handstands, like headstands, types of floor work where they're doing pushing actions with their arms, with their shoulders, with their chest, because so much of pole is pulling. We want to make sure you're working all of the muscles in the shoulder joint and working it in all of the range of motions that it goes, not just pulling, because that's the way that we can get injured over time if we get super unbalanced.
Yeah, how would you help prevent injury?
Let's see. That's a really great question for a physical therapist. I suspect you probably have some other people you're talking to who have more of an injury prevention background than I do. But kind of in general, the best ideas are making sure that we're strengthening our muscles to support the range of motion that we're doing. In our shoulders, the magic muscles that everyone likes to talk about are our rotator cuff muscles, which are 4 small muscles that help keep the ball and socket of our shoulder joints in place, in snug, and have everything moving where it's supposed to move and not going rogue and having our bones slide around something weird. Because unlike our hip, the ball and socket of our shoulder joint is super duper shallow. It's actually quite easy for the ball of the head of our upper arm to slide around a little bit. And that's where the rotator cuff muscles come in. They try to keep it snug in the spots where it's supposed to be. So doing exercises, if you just Google rotator cuff exercises, there's a lot that come up. There's lots of instructors who post really cool drills on Instagram that are specific conditioning shoulder drills for pole dancers. That's something that I actually wish I was better about in the early stages of my pole journey, was being more vigilant about the conditioning, the eat your vegetables type exercises, the ones that are boring and kind of squeezy and kind of hard. You just want to dive in and do all your dancing and do all of your tricks. So I was always very good at that with contortion, but with pole, I'm so excited to do the things. And you got to remember that my pole conditioning is different than my contortion conditioning. And that's really, really good, making sure you're strong enough to be working on the skills that you're doing. And we're not just blindly going into the skills because they look cool.
Yeah, I've definitely heard a lot of that as well, just that people who come in with other types of sport backgrounds think, oh, I'll be fine, and then they're totally not. So it's hard for everybody.
Yes. There's definitely a couple of days where my shoulders felt a little tweaky after. I'm like, okay, I should probably work a little bit on strengthening this new range of motion that I'm using my shoulders in. It's not, everything doesn't automatically carry over.
So what about when you have, tougher ranges of motion, like, weak ankles, wrists, or bad shoulders or something? I know people end up, including me, doing compensatory moves because you're you just want to get the move and everything. What would you suggest?
Yes, yeah, that's a good question, especially as we're talking especially about a lot of adult pole students. Many of us may have old injuries from doing other active things, or dumb injuries that weren't even from doing anything cool, but we're old and our bodies start to be a little bit harder, and you get some niggling stuff going on. But yeah, just being aware if you have an area of your body that's a little weaker, or maybe it was injured at one point and therefore it's just never totally gotten back on the train to moving effectively. Really, the easiest thing you can do is work with a coach to help kind of assess your body and make sure that they can spot areas that you might be compensating that you might not even realize it. But just everyone always knows, always training on both sides, not just doing the side that you're good at and is slightly easier, but perhaps even considering maybe occasionally, maybe not every time you practice, but spending more time on your bad side, because usually our second favorite side, as I like to call it, is harder for a reason. It's because our muscles aren't as strong on that side. We don't have the same coordination on that side. So we definitely want to give that side a little bit more love so that we can catch it up to the better side, so that we're not likely to get into overtraining injuries from having our muscles be really, really imbalanced and always doing things in the same direction and putting the same stress on our joints the same way over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have any, what kind of realistic goals would you set for, beginners to help measure their progress?
I think it depends on kind of what they're interested in, how frequently they're willing to train. So generally when people talk about goals, they say they should be, SMART goals are specific, measurable, don't remember what the A stands for, attainable, I don't know. But anyway, a lot of times when people talk about goals, it helps for them to be more specific than I'm going to get more flexible. But I actually, one of the things I caution about people who can get really excited about having goals is putting time limits on them. I want to get my splits by July or by the end of the year, New Year's resolution style. A much more productive way to train that I would suggest is make your goals around a habit. I want to train my flexibility for my back or for my splits, or perhaps I just want to go to a flexibility class once a week for the next 3 months or something. So it's more a goal around building a habit, and then just being excited about the gains that you make over time. I really like having goals towards specific skills. And one of the neat things about flexibility and contortion specifically is that there's always a skill progression that's you can break things down into smaller skills. If you want to do a needle scale, which is pulling your leg behind you in a split while you're in a crazy shouldery back bend, that is a very complex skill, but you can break it down into, I want to be able to do a front splits. I want to be able to do a front standing splits. I want to be able to hold my back leg with my hand. I want to be able to do all of those things at the same time. So that's another way that you can break things down. In terms of goals and progress, usually a similar question that comes up when I'm working with students is how do I measure progress? What can I expect? What's realistic? Because in terms of trying to estimate how long is it going to take me to do my split, no one's going to be able to tell you that. Anyone who says that you can get your splits in 30 days, any of those YouTube videos are just full of crap, because there's so many things that influence how fast or not fast you get flexible. There's lots of things you can do to optimize it, but there's so many variations in bodies and just how we respond to flexibility and all of this other stuff happening in our lives that would impact how fast you progress. It's really hard to estimate. But what I like to tell students is you should be able to see or feel some kind of progress over the course of 4 to 6 weeks, which is about a month. So if you're training regularly, you should either see progress, you're able to stretch deeper in the pose that you're working on or the range of motion that you're targeting, or it should feel more comfortable. Say you're just working on being able to touch your toes, your hamstring flexibility. Maybe it doesn't look like you can reach farther, but you're more comfortable hanging out in your forward folds. That still counts as progress. But if you feel like you've been training a couple days a week, you think you're doing the right stuff, and it's been a whole month or two and you've seen zero progress, it still feels like garbage, then that tells you that something isn't right in your training routine, and then something's probably going to have to be tweaked. Whether it's the volume, the exercises you're doing, the form you're doing, how frequently you're training, whether you're taking rest days, lots of different variables that you can look at to kind of figure it out and adjust to find something that works a little bit better.
Yeah, I love what you said about, not measuring time, because I think, yeah, everybody gets so caught up on that. Me, the comparison issues, well, especially when you're progressing with a class and then you can see, oh, those people got it like that and I'm still stuck here, and then, everybody even moving on from beginners or intermediate, and you're still like, I can't do this part. So, would you
Yeah,
have any
that's
tips
a
for
great call out.
that comparison, combating that?
Um, yeah, that's a great question, because I think that's something that everyone struggles with in some way or another. Is especially in groups class situations. It's a little different if you're like doing classes online in your home or something. But yeah, in a group class, the comparing yourself to other people. But one thing that helped me a lot, because as someone who's new to pole and building my strength and being incredibly jealous of everyone who could just pull themselves up on the pole and do all of the really muscly stuff while I was still working on that, is just to remember that everybody's good at some things and everybody is also on the struggle bus for other things. So if you really, really pay attention, some people who are totally crushing some things, who seem like they're going way faster at you than some things, there's always going to be things that they're also struggling with as well. One thing I really like about the pole studio where I train at a lot, which is Dollhouse in Minneapolis, is the instructors are all so good about celebrating wins of all of the different students, kind of on whatever level the win happens to be. So it might be that like we've been doing a class for 6 weeks with the same group of dancers, and like it's the last class of the 6 weeks where one of the dancers was finally able to climb more than once up the pole, and maybe that was something that everyone else could do from the second class, but like being so freaking excited for that person because this was such a big moment for them, and just acknowledging that everyone moves at different speeds, everyone's victories are of different sizes and they come at different times, and just being there to celebrate when you have victories.
Yeah, and that victory might just be like, pulling yourself up on the pole, like, for 5 seconds.
Yes, exactly. And that's just kind of what I was talking about with flexibility training is if you're really struggling with a particular skill, you can always break it down and make those milestones smaller. So if you're really struggling to climb up the pole, which sounds basic, but there's a lot of things that have to happen. So just getting used to being able to pull yourself up a couple times with your feet on the floor. Maybe you can do that 5 times this class, and you could only do it twice last class before your arms felt like you were going to fall off. Like, that is totally a victory to celebrate. So anytime you're really struggling with something and feeling like you're not making progress, think about, are there ways that you can break it down a little bit more so that you can have those milestones to reach along the
way? Does progress tend to like go up and down? Like, you say you could do five pull-ups this way, and then you go, yeah, I can do that, but then you could only do like one the next class, and then that makes you feel discouraged. Is that something that happens?
Yes, especially with flexibility training. It's it's flexibility training specifically. That's something that I think is a bit of a shock and a disappointment for some students, that our progress doesn't look like this. Oh, I forget, we're on audio. It's not a straight line. It's not like this beautiful graph. It's a little bit more like a roller coaster. So it's very normal to have good days, and then just because you did your split once doesn't mean it's like locked in. You got to keep training it, because there's going to be days where you're tighter and there's going to be days when you're more flexible. Just like with pole, there's going to be days where you're a little stronger. There's going to be days where your coordination's a little bit better. And there's going to be days where you're a little stressed out, you didn't sleep as well, and just, things aren't really clicking. That's fine. It's just part of the journey. So always just being gentle with yourself and realizing you're going to have your good days and you're going to have your better days.
And how do you help people stick to those schedules, especially through those bad days?
That's a good question. I think it's mostly it's in a group class setting. It's just acknowledging that, like,
because you can't rely on motivation alone.
Oh yes, right. Yeah, motivation, and motivation is a finite resource, because you can't just assume that it's always there for you to get through. Something that always helped me was just being in group classes. So especially when I was starting my flexibility training, and same with pole, was training with a group of people. So you have kind of your cohort of friends who can peer pressure you to keep going in a good way, in a productive way, when you're kind of feeling struggly or when you're feeling lazy, and being there to help you and celebrating when things are going well. One thing that I had a really hard time with, especially when I was like starting flexibility training, is I thought stretching was really boring. I did not want to do it by myself. I thought it was like, now I love it, but at the time I really could not be bothered to stretch by myself. And I needed the group classes because I needed that atmosphere and that vibe. And it's nice to be in classes where maybe you are having a bad day, but everyone else is, yeah, that happens, but you're here. Good for you. We're excited that you're here. We're excited that you made time to hang out with us type thing. And that helps a lot.
Yeah, I think finding it boring is something that not many people talk about as much. Like, yeah, it's not just hard. It can be really boring to do normal stretches. So,
yeah, it takes flexibility training is interesting that way.
Would there be any common mistakes you see people do, especially beginners?
Mistakes about flexibility training specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah, gosh, there are so many. I have written many a blog post about flexibility training mistakes. Some of the probably most common ones that come to mind, specifically more with the kind of beginners, when we're talking about either people who are just starting flexibility training, like for real this time, or people who are kind of coming back to it after a bit of a break. I think the biggest one would be only doing passive stretching, which thankfully, I'm crossing my fingers over here, I think is becoming less of a norm. But at least like when I originally started stretching, when I did gym class in high school, X years ago, when we did stretching, it was just like, all right, you're going to touch your toes, and we're going to do some arm swings, and then we're going to touch our toes again, and we're just going to sit in these stretches and wait for the flexibility magic to happen. And that's not how it works. So there's nothing wrong with passive stretching by itself. Passive stretching is part of flexibility acquisition, but most of flexibility gains come from strengthening our muscles. Because when it comes to flexibility is really governed by our nervous system. And the reason that we can't just automatically flop into a split is because our body thinks that it's not safe and that your muscles aren't strong enough to protect your joints. So as you start sliding your legs out, your body's going to tense those muscles. That's what the stretch reflex is. It's resisting letting those muscles lengthen longer because your body's like, whoa, what's going on here? Oh, we're not okay with this. And so what we do is we strengthen the muscles while they're in that lengthened position, and we strengthen the other muscles that help pull them into that lengthened position. And our body says, oh, okay, we can move in this position. This isn't so scary. Maybe we will let you go a little bit deeper. And then over time, as you get stronger, your body lets those muscles lengthen even more. And that's where the flexibility gains come in. So that style of training we call active flexibility, where you're using your muscles while you're doing some kind of a stretch. And that should be a large portion of how you're training. So typically when I'm teaching flexibility classes, like, yes, we do things like holding our splits, and we do things like relaxed forward folds and hanging out in a lunge. But most of what we're doing is some kind of exercise that we're doing for reps, or we're contracting muscles during a particular pose so that it's really focused on strengthening. I always warn first-time students that this is not a yoga class. We're not just going to be relaxing and chilling out. It's going to be a workout, and I expect them to be pleasantly sore the next day because we're really focused on strengthening so much. So that would be like number one. If you only knew one thing about flexibility training, it would be to make sure that you're strengthening the muscles and not just doing passive stretching, because that goes for any type of flexibility training, whether you're trying to get your splits, whether you're trying to do back bends, whether you're trying to work on your shoulders or ankle mobility. All of that comes down to strength.
Yeah, I was very I wouldn't say pleasantly surprised by when I first went to dedicated flexibility classes, and a lot of it was active flexibility. I'm like, oh, this isn't fun. This is hard.
Yes, it's very butt kicking. I always like when students come after class, they're like, wow, I found muscles I didn't even know I had. Yes, that means you did the right stuff today.
Yeah, like, why is everything hurting? If there was one thing that you could encourage every pole dancer to take away from flexibility in general, like, what would that be?
I guess the fact that it's really, flexibility is really a facet of being strength and range, a little bit of what we just talked about. I guess maybe one other big overarching takeaway is that it's It is possible for adults. I talk with a lot of people, and I also see it come up a lot on Instagram and on Reddit, where I'm very active, where there's just this perception that if you didn't do flexibility as like a teenager or as a child, it's just gone. You lost it. It's gone forever. Don't even bother working on it. But I work with so many adults. That's really the niche group for me, is people who are coming to flexibility as an adult and having zero bendy hobbies in the past and trying to find their flexibility as an older person, either in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, their 60s. I have worked with 40 and 50 and 60-year-old adults who are learning contortion, who are coming from like very average sedentary lifestyles, not yogis, and working to get flexibility to do really cool, fun things with their bodies. And it's really cool to be able to find other adults in the same situation. So if you're feeling like surely no one can be as tight as you, just looking out there for a lot of the inspirational stories to find other people who are in a similar boat. So many people make progress as adults. It's just a little harder to find because usually people are thinking about it as kids.
Yeah, there's so many inspirational stories out there. Like, that's what I really love about pole, is that it's so accessible to everybody. There's so many, like, I started at 60 and you know, they're doing the splits in the air.
Exactly.
It's great. So I know you have you know, online flexibility classes. Would you like to tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. If this is the spot where I plug all my stuff. So yes, I teach online classes. I have them a couple times during the day. All of the information is on my website, which is DaniWinksFlexibility.com. But also a big part of how I teach is with class recordings and on-demand classes, because I teach students all over the world. I understand the time zones for some of my classes don't work for some folks. So I have a whole slew of classes that are recorded workshops for all sorts of different topics, whether you're just trying to get your splits for the first time and your splits are like more than a foot off the ground. There is a workshop for that. It is a 45-minute starting splits workshop. That is a great one for beginners. I also have ones that are for very bendy people, contortion workshops for people who can already do their splits, can already do bridges, and want to do crazy things that they just don't know how to do yet. So there's workshops for that as well. So that's on my website. It's a great place to look for that.
Yeah, and there's a ton of like just free stuff on your bendy blog that is pretty awesome to just browse.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the really cool things about now that I've been able to make the full-time switch to basically teaching flexibility all the time is I love writing and teaching and educating. So as you've noticed, I write a lot of blog posts on the Bendy blog, and some of them are geared towards beginners, some of them are geared towards more advanced students, but all of them are on different flexibility topics. And I am super active on Instagram as well, putting out different flexibilities tutorials and stretching tips, and starting to do a little bit more on YouTube. But I'm really passionate about spreading more of the flexibility gospel and trying to teach as many people as humanly possible to stretch effectively. And a lot of this information I'm putting out for free. If you happen to like it and also want to take classes, great. But there's tons of stuff that I put out for free on my website and on Instagram that I would wholeheartedly recommend checking out.
Yeah, so amazing. You know, make sure to go check that out, guys. You know, all the links will be down below. And Dani, thank you so much for being our guide on flexibility today, and you know, everyone for tuning in.
Yes, thanks so much for having me. Good luck, everyone.
We've reached the end of our journey, so you know, remember next time to stay strong, keep pushing your limits, and embrace your individual journey.
Don't forget to grab your free access to the Pole Adventures Compendium, a collection of incredible resources to help you progress on your pole journey. And if you enjoyed today's adventure, make sure to leave a review so other explorers can embark on the journey with us. This is the Pole Adventures podcast, and your next adventure awaits.